Welcome to the Escape the System channel. I'm Joe Barnes, author of the books you see above me. Today's video, I want to share a secret with you. It's a secret for everybody who's ever felt like an outsider, who feels that they are somewhat rebellious, and they're not too happy with this outsider status. They want to go from outsider to being an agent of change. And when you become an agent of change, there are a lot of rewards that go with that. So I'm going to show you, as a rebel, how to make that change today. Now, before I get into it, I'll give you a little bit of a background into myself. I'm what I would call a reluctant rebel. If you go all the way back to my time at school, I wasn't the kid breaking all the rules. To this day, I haven't even smoked a cigarette. I wasn't experimenting with alcohol and drugs at a young age. I did none of that stuff. I actually studied pretty hard, played lots of sports, got good grades. But my rebellion occurred just about at the time when I left school and went to university. And I began to get really disgruntled with the path that lay before me. You see, I'd gone through all these years of schooling, as we all do, being told, study hard so that you can get good grades, so that you can get into a good university. Study hard at university so that you can get a good job, and then you can get a promotion and a promotion after that. And I just got sick of it. I thought to myself, I'm going to be chasing for my entire life. I'm never actually going to be living. And I didn't want that. And that made me question a lot of things about society and the way we live, and made me feel a little bit disillusioned. So I stopped listening to society's voice and decided to take my own path. That involved me first training as a tennis coach, then a hypnotherapist, then about 10 years after that, starting to write all of the books you see above me. Your rebellion may be against that, it may be against other things. It doesn't really matter. The formula I'm going to reveal to you works for every single type of rebel, for anyone who feels like they're an outsider and they want to be something more than that. They want to change, as I said, your status from outsider to agent of change. It is absolutely possible if you follow a few of the steps that I'm going to present to you today. Because I'm guessing that your situation is pretty similar to mine, and there's a dilemma you might be facing at the moment. And that is that you have to try and succeed in a world that seems set up for you to fail. And there are 4 different factors you may be encountering on a day-to-day basis. One is loneliness. Feeling like no one truly understands you. So you may have relationships, you may be married, you may have lots of friends, but deep down you feel nobody really gets who you are. And that can be very difficult to cope with. Another thing you might be struggling with is rejection, both of you on a personal level and your ideas. You present groundbreaking ideas to your place of work, but you always get a kickback with them saying, well, why would we do this? This is never going to work. It's not possible. Live in the real world. The world doesn't operate or work in that way. Another thing you may be struggling with is just being generally unstimulated by conventional ways of working and living, just exactly as I was when I was at university and looking what lay beyond in the wider world for me. This idea that there wasn't really anything out there. I didn't want to become an accountant, a lawyer. I found the prospect of doing that incredibly boring. I wanted something exciting. I wanted some kind of adventure. And society doesn't really present us with any options for doing that. We very much have to create the adventure ourselves. So that may be something you're struggling with at the moment. And the final thing is just having to fake your way through life. Because there's no easy place that the rebel fits in, one option for them is just to try and go along with the world that society presents to them and put on a brave face. Pretend that you're enjoying it. Pretend that you're stimulated at work. Pretend that you enjoy the social interactions you have. But that can be tiring, spending your whole life faking your way through it. Not only is it tiring, but you don't actually have to do it. So with those 4 things in mind, I'm going to present a solution to you. Basically, my idea is inspired by the Myers-Briggs test. Now, you may have heard of this. It's originally created in 1942. It's a personality test. They ask you a series of questions and then they give you a personality type. I think there are 16 different personality types in total, and you find out your one, and then that helps you maybe in a work context find a job that's appropriate for you, perhaps in a therapeutic context as well, understanding who you are. There's a professor called Professor Amaral, and he created a much more modern and up-to-date personality test. And he had a very profound quote about these personality tests and discovering about who you are. And this is what he said. He said, "The way for you to grow is to know about yourself." So this is really what today is about. Once you discover who you really are, what you're here to do, it's like a light bulb going off in your mind. You actually understand your place in the world. And as I said, you can go from being an outsider to an agent of change. So bear that in mind when you look at all personality tests. This is simply, they're not an exact science, but it's simply a way of understanding yourself. And by understanding yourself, you can grow. So for me, I just wanted to simplify the Myers-Briggs test. It's not that I think it's bad or that it isn't useful. I just wanted to come up with something a little more easier to understand. And for that reason, I grade people into 3 different types of categories. Here on this planet, you are either a leader, a follower, or a rebel. We have the leader who is driven and has a need for power. Now, you've got the executive in that picture there. At the heads of big corporations, at the heads of government, at the heads of schools, you'll find leaders scattered throughout society. And the main thing to remember is they're driven by a need for power. You've got the follower. Now, the follower certainly isn't driven by a need for power. Their drive is for security and comfort. Now, they make their way through life not necessarily enjoying it, more putting up with it and just getting by. And they will put up with pretty much anything. They will be your shit shovelers, so long as you give them that feeling of security. So they're the kind of glue that keeps the whole thing together, because they don't rebel against the status quo. They just get on with their lives and do what they got to do, as long as that deal is in place. As long as they feel secure at the end of the day, they will be okay. Then you've got the final category at the end, which is the rebels, the smallest category. There are not many rebels around. It's a minority. Now, they're not driven by a need for power. They don't want to be in a position where they're giving orders and ordering people around, but they don't react well to other people ordering them around. Unlike the follower, they don't have this desperate need for security. Of course, every human needs a degree of security in their lives, but it's not their overarching need. Instead, the rebels are driven by a need for freedom and a secondary need for meaning. So once you understand what drives the 3 types of people, the leader, the follower, the rebel, the picture starts to become clearer on how they interact with each other and what you, as a rebel, need to do. And look at this picture here. This explains your role as a rebel and how society works. I call it the human hierarchy scale. And you've got right at the top of the hierarchy, the leaders. Now, they're only 15% of the population, but they are in the most powerful position. They get to enforce the status quo. They might make sure that the rules are obeyed, and they set the agenda for everyone else to follow. Then the mass of people, 80%, are followers. Their role is to obey the status quo. As I mentioned earlier, if there were no followers, there'd be total chaos, because all you'd have is some leaders ordering rebels around and rebels refusing to do anything. The followers don't refuse. As I mentioned, as long as they're promised security and comfort, they will obey, and they will carry out the orders of the leaders, and society, to varying degrees, functions. Right at the bottom, though, you've got the rebels, just 5%, the minority. Now, take this hierarchy scale literally. This is literally leaders at the top having the best lives, followers in the middle having mediocre lives, rebels at the bottom, if they don't actually know what they're here to do and how to fulfill their destiny, having the worst lives, for all the reasons I pointed out at the beginning of this video. However, you will notice that black line at the side of the scale, which goes from the bottom all the way to the top. And this is what you, as a rebel, can do. You can change your position entirely, go all the way to the top of the human hierarchy scale, because your role is to challenge the status quo. That's what you're here to do. You're here to sense stagnation, whether that's in society, whether it's within your place of work, whether it's within products available for people to use, to sense state of stagnation when there's a demand for something new, and innovate and bring that change into the world. And if you can fulfill that role as a rebel, you go all the way to the top of the human hierarchy and you create a paradigm shift. So what I'm describing to you, as I've said already, is an ecosystem, a leader, follower, rebel ecosystem. Now, I'm sure you're aware of what an ecosystem is. There's a picture there if you don't understand. It's basically in the environment, everything works together. Every single animal or plant has a role. And if you take one piece out of the chain, the whole ecosystem can collapse. I want you to think of the leader, follower, rebel personality types just as a human ecosystem and how we all need each other. And once you understand your role as a rebel, which is to challenge the status quo in whatever walk of life you might be, you then find a path to a happy and successful life, because this is your life's purpose. This is what you're born to do. And you may not have realized it. You may have just felt like an outsider and that there was no place for you in the world. But your role is actually to create change. And you can see this play throughout history. Look at these three historical figures: Jesus, Martin Luther King Jr., and Galileo. Look how they perfectly encapsulate that human hierarchy scale and the rebel leader follower ecosystem. Now, you may say Jesus and Martin Luther King Jr. were leaders, and I agree, they had a lot of leadership traits. But to begin with, they were rebels. Jesus, born in 0 AD, the calendar is obviously named after him, but at the age of 20, 30, whenever it was, I think it was his late 20s or 30 years old, he started his missionary. And he looked at the world at the time and saw a lot of spiritual stagnation. There are a multiplicity of religions. People prayed to the moon god, the sun god, Jupiter, Venus. And Jesus came along and said, no, the way to have the best spiritual life is to understand that there's only one God. And this shook up the whole system. But he created a paradigm shift, or after he died, his teachings created a paradigm shift, and Christianity was accepted. And then that became the dominant spiritual way of operating and living. Martin Luther King Jr. did pretty much the same, but with civil rights in the US during the 50s and 60s, a time where there was real, true systemic racism, where segregation was enshrined in law. And he said, no, this isn't a way for people to live. This isn't a way for society to function. We are all equal and we should be treated equal. There should be equal rights for everybody. He challenged that paradigm, was successful, and then created a paradigm shift for new people to come in and rule over and govern. Galileo did exactly the same in the world of science. He discovered that the church's view of the world at the time, where the Earth was seen as the center of the universe with all the other planets rotating around, was incorrect, and that the sun was the center of the universe. Of course, he got called a heretic. He was placed under house arrest. He was challenging the leaders at the time, but eventually he was successful, and the world changed. A paradigm shift was created, and we saw things differently. So I've just outlined three incredibly powerful rebels, and yes, they do have leadership traits. And yes, also with the three categories I've come up with, don't think that you're only one of them. You may have leadership traits, yet still be a rebel. You may be a little bit of a follower as well. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And there's no judgment against any of these three types of categories. We need our leaders, we need our followers, we need our rebels. I'm just here for the rebels, trying to show you how to live the best life possible as a rebel. Because we need new ideas. I think we can all agree on that, but they're not going to come from the leaders and followers. The leaders benefit from the status quo continuing as it is now. That's how they maintain their positions of power. The followers don't like new ideas because they feel it threatens their security. So it's down to you, the rebel, to become that agent of change, to stand up and realize what your destiny truly is. It's likely you have a significant contribution to make, but you need to know how. And that's basically why I wrote my book, The Rebel Code, the one you see up there. There are 12 steps in that to show you how to become the successful agent of change. The video, unfortunately today, I can't go through all 12 of them. It's just going to take too long. So I'm just going to give you a taster of the Rebel Code. I'm going to go through the first 2 steps right now. But bear in mind, the whole process of this is to help transform you from an outsider into somebody who can be an agent of change and live a happy and successful life. So step 1 of the Rebel Code is to create your own world, but don't get lost in it. So what do these 3 historical figures have in common? You can probably guess who the one in the middle is. Michael Jackson. Then we got Pablo Escobar on the other side, and the one at the front, the one from ancient times, is Alexander the Great. Now, before you say it's that they're all dead, well, that's just the obvious. There's something a little deeper that they have in common. All 3 of these individuals, highly successful in their own field, created their own worlds. Think about it. Michael Jackson lived at Neverland Ranch. Pablo Escobar had the Hacienda Nápoles. And Alexander the Great had an entire empire with 20 cities dotted around this empire called Alexandria, named after him. They created their own environments where they could thrive, be comfortable, and be free from the limitations of society. Now, you may say all of them, slightly controversial figures, didn't meet the best of ends, and I wouldn't disagree with you. But that's because they all made a fatal mistake. They got lost in their own worlds. The idea of creating your own world is actually very liberating, and it's the perfect place and space every rebel needs to be to thrive. So my message to you today is not to live in the real world. Now, this is a term that gets thrown around all the time. I remember leaving university, coming back home, and everybody saying to me, oh, welcome to the real world. Now you've got to go get a job, you've got to be a wage slave, your life is going to be severely restricted, you're not going to have any free time anymore. But this is the real world. This is where we all live. This is what reality is, in essence, that there is no other life outside of this. You just have to accept it and adapt to it. But I'm suggesting to you as a rebel that that's the absolutely worst thing that you can do. And instead of living in the real world, you should seek to create your own world. Because if you accept the so-called real world, then you're going to run into a host of problems. You're going to have your creativity stifled, your dreams shattered, and your outlook is going to become narrowed. It will be a very frustrating and limiting place for you to live. Now, a lot of people would agree with that, but then they would say, look, it's just not possible. You can't live outside the real world. Well, I gave you 3 examples of people who did, and yes, they were extraordinary people. And there's also something to bear in mind, though, is that you don't have to do it on such a huge scale that those 3 characters did. You don't need to conquer an empire or be a musical superstar or a drugs baron. You can create your own world in a much more modest way, yet still benefit from having this detachment from all the limitation, all the boredom, all the negativity of living in the real world. And here's how you do it. I call these the 4 tenets to creating your own world. And if you master these 4 different things, it doesn't matter that you aren't famous. You may not even need to become a multimillionaire. As long as you do these 4 things, you can have that freedom, that clarity in your mind to thrive as a rebel and fulfill your role as this agent of change. Now, the 4 tenets of creating your own world is, number 1, Be in charge of your time. So this likely means that employed work is not going to be for you. Likely, not certainly. There's a chance you may be able to find employment somewhere which does respect your time and offers you a degree of flexibility. But if it doesn't, then you will have to become self-employed, run your own business, manage your own scale, work to a time, work in a fashion that fills you with energy rather than depleting you and draining you. And also make time for all the other things that are important in your life. The second tenet to creating your own world is only spending time with the people you love, like, or tolerate. I think we could all agree that when we're surrounded by people or even have just a few people, negative influences in our life, it can really drain us. Now, if you're in a work environment where you can't escape that, or if you're in a housing environment where you've got noisy neighbors or assholes around you, that can be a real drain. So when you create your own world, you detach yourself from all of that and only let the people into your life who raise you up. Number 3 is living and working in an environment that pleases you. Now you may wonder what that picture is there on to the side of the writing, and that's actually where I live. Now, I can't claim that I own the entire residence. In fact, I just occupy a very small flat in one of the buildings. And this isn't too far away from a town in the UK, maybe 1 mile, that's all. It looks like it's completely isolated. And it does feel a bit like that. And my quality of life, as soon as I drive up the drive and go into this place surrounded by trees and nature, immediately improves. Now, this is my own world. It doesn't mean that outside of that I'm not comfortable and I can't function, but within those boundaries, I feel a sense of peace. As I said, my quality of life improves, and we should all seek to find a space, whether we live there or work there, where we can feel that. Our space, our environment has an impact on our state of mind, and you want to make sure that it's a harmonious one. Finally, the fourth part of creating your own world is being able to express yourself without worrying what other people think. Being authentic, being true to yourself. You can't go through life faking and pretending that or saying things just to make other people feel okay, or saying things because you're trying to fit in. You want to have the freedom to be yourself. Master these 4 areas and you've created your own world. And in doing so, you'd have created a space where your creativity can thrive, your quality of life will improve, and you just show up in life that much more effective and able to be that successful agent of change. Now, step 2 of the Rebel Code is listen to your heart when making my major life decisions. Now, picture this. Imagine you're in a forest in Oregon, in the US, and you're running along a forest trail. It's really early in the morning, I think 6 or 7 a.m. It's a glorious morning, but you're running, you're about 24 years old. You're running because you're an athlete and you compete regularly at long distance running, but you're also running because you need to clear your head. You've got a lot on your mind. You've just come back from university. You have a degree, you have a master's, you've done a stint in the army, so you're super qualified and prepared for the next stage of your life. And that next stage of your life should be becoming a journalist like your dad, or maybe becoming an accountant. You studied accountancy at university, so why not? And as I said, you're super qualified, you're intelligent. It seems that within a few years, you could be set up and living what society deems to be a very successful life. You've got all of that on one side of your mind. On the other side is this so-called crazy idea. You wrote a thesis at university about importing Japanese running shoes and selling them in the US market. You're really inspired by the idea and you think it could take off. And you want to make it more than a thesis. You want to make this your business idea, your plan. And as you go on your morning run, you're sort of bouncing between the two ideas and making a decision about what you've got to do. Who are you? Well, if you hadn't guessed already, you are Phil Knight, who would go on to become the founder and CEO of Nike. This is the decision he was faced with. And the point I'm wanting to make here now is that rebels make their major life decisions based on what their gut and heart is telling them. Phil Knight obviously rejected the idea of following what would have been the easier path to what society considers a successful life, and instead decided to follow his dreams. And I'm saying to you that you've got to do something similar, because the rebel navigates their way through life differently than the leader and follower. The leader and follower make major life decisions based on what makes sense at a logical level. And this roughly translates to meaning what makes financial sense, what's going to make them the most amount of money, provide them with security and also access to positions of power. That's how the leader and follower make decisions. You don't make the decisions the same way as a rebel. You've got to make decisions based on what feels right to you. Now, this can make the choices that rebels make seem crazy at times. Think back to Phil Knight on his morning run. It was a bit crazy to try and launch that shoe selling business, because why do it when you're so well qualified, when you could easily be earning, a salary that's in the top 5% of those in the country just by continuing on the path you've already been going? So that's a little bit crazy, right? But you've actually got to do this, because making heart-based decisions is a way you allow the magic to occur. Now, Phil Knight, in his book, The Shoe Dog, which I really recommend, is an autobiography about his time at Nike and starting it up and taking it to the point where it IPO'd in the early 1980s. He had this to say when he was reflecting at the end of his book: "Am I allowed to think that some coincidences are more than coincidental? Can I be forgiven for thinking or hoping that the universe or some guiding daemon has been nudging me, whispering to me?" And this is the point. When you follow your heart, you allow the universe to step in and guide you in quite often miraculous directions. Now, Phil Knight makes the point at the end of his book that the very first shoe that was ever discovered was in a cave. Guess where? Oregon, in the United States of America. When? 1938, the year that Phil Knight was born. Now, he also mentions that Nike's first ever athlete signing, Steve Prefontaine, a long distance runner, his best time for the mile, the 4 digits, and I can't remember them exactly, are the same 4 digits that the Nike offices throughout the world, and the same 4 digits that their telephone number ends with. He's saying this is beyond coincidence. This was meant to happen. And if you can get into the flow of following your heart and connecting with maybe the universe's plan, then these things can also happen to you. And here's a warning. As crazy as following your heart can seem, if you shy away from it, you may find that as a rebel, your life is really lacking in meaning. So you have to make some brave and tough decisions. But there's another warning. Just because you do that and you follow your heart, don't think that things are going to be easy. The right path and the easy path, often not the same thing. It's important to realize that as a rebel, you're probably going to face greater adversity than the leaders and followers. Here's what you're going to have to deal with. You're going to be ridiculed, you're going to be rejected, you're going to be suppressed, and you're most certainly going to be misunderstood. But this can't stop you from listening to your heart and going for what you feel is your destiny and what you should be doing. And the ultimate example of that is that man in the picture there, Nelson Mandela. He made a series of heart-based decisions throughout his life. And you may have said at one point, well, this is a total disaster. This is why you don't listen to your heart, because look at where he is. He's in a prison cell. 27 years he spent in prison, 18 in that particular cell in the picture on Robben Island. 2x2 meter cell, barely enough space for him to lie down. He didn't even have a bed. Day after day spent in a chalk mine, chipping away at chalk, so much so that the reflection of the sun off the chalk damaged his eyesight. Only got to see his family once a year. He was deprived massively, but it all worked out for him in the end. His decision to follow his heart and his conscience led him to overthrow an entire political system, and he became the president of a country. So that's why, even though following your heart may challenge you to the limits, you've got to do it. And that pretty much brings an end of what I have to share with you today. That's 2 of the insights from my book. Create your own world, but remember, don't get lost in it. And number 2, navigate your way through life by following your heart. Also, understand what your role is as a rebel. You're not here to be an outsider, to be forever shunned and feeling dejected and like there's no place for you in the world. You're actually here to create change. So live up to that role. And with that in mind, I'm going to bring the video to an end. If you enjoyed it, please like it. Please subscribe to the channel for more content. Leave a comment below if anything in particular resonated with you. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.